The phone buzzed at 3:17 a.m., jarring me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. The caller ID showed Sandra's name, and I already knew what this was about before I answered. "Come pick me up from Arnold's place. Now." Her voice carried that familiar tone of entitlement, the one that assumed I'd drop everything and play chauffeur to her midnight adventures. I sat up in our empty bed, looking around the bedroom that had become more mine than ours over the past 6 months. The engineering blueprints scattered across my nightstand told the story of my recent insomnia better than any diary could. While Sandra had been working late at the accounting firm, I'd been redesigning harbor infrastructure and questioning every assumption I'd made about my marriage. "Jack, did you hear me? I need you to come get me right now." The sarcastic part of my brain, the part that had kept me sane through 15 years of mechanical engineering and 8 years of marriage, kicked into high gear. She really thinks I'm that much of a doormat? Not tonight, sweetheart. "I heard you, Sandra, but here's the thing. I'm not your personal Uber driver anymore." The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the rain starting against our bedroom window. Our little house in the harbor district had weathered plenty of storms, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the beginning of something that would change everything. "What did you say?" Her voice went ice cold, the way it did when she was preparing for battle. "I said I'm not coming. Order yourself a ride. Better yet, ask Arnold to drive you home. I'm sure his fancy sports car has working headlights." I hung up before she could respond and immediately called the local taxi company. "Yeah, I need a cab sent to 1247 Ocean View Drive, apartment 4B. The passenger's name is Sandra Mitchell, and she needs to go to—" I paused, considering my options. "Actually, just have her tell you where she wants to go when you get there." Then I did something I'd been planning for weeks, but never had the courage to execute. I went to our walk-in closet and pulled out the cardboard boxes I'd been hiding behind my winter coats. For the next 3 hours, I carefully packed Sandra's most prized possessions, her collection of designer handbags, the expensive jewelry her mother Isabella had given her, the silk scarves she'd bought during our trip to Paris back when we still pretended to be happy. Each item went into its own box with methodical precision. I wasn't angry. Anger would have made me sloppy. I was calculating, and that made me dangerous in ways Sandra had never bothered to discover. By dawn, 6 neat boxes sat by our front door, each labeled with Sandra's name in my precise engineering handwriting. I made coffee in our tiny kitchen, the same kitchen where Sandra had told me 3 months ago that she needed space to figure things out, the same kitchen where she'd answered late-night phone calls with hushed, intimate tones while I pretended to read the newspaper. The front door slammed open at 6:43 a.m. Sandra stood in the doorway, her hair disheveled, her makeup smeared, wearing the same clothes she'd had on when she left for her client dinner the night before. She looked at the boxes, then at me sitting calmly at our kitchen table with my coffee and morning blueprints. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing at the boxes like they were evidence of some crime. I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring both the bitter taste and the moment. "Those are your things, Sandra, the things that matter most to you. I figured since you're spending so much time at Arnold's place, you might want to have them there." Her face went through several expressions, confusion, anger, and finally something I hadn't seen in years, genuine surprise. For once in our marriage, I'd done something she hadn't anticipated. "You can't just pack my stuff and expect me to leave. This is my house, too." "Actually," I said, pulling out a folder from beneath my blueprints, "it's not. The mortgage is in my name, remember? You insisted on keeping your credit separate for your business ventures." I opened the folder and showed her the deed. Turns out that was excellent advice. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Sandra's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to process information that didn't fit her worldview. In 8 years of marriage, I'd never challenged her directly. I'd been the steady, reliable husband who fixed things when they broke and stayed quiet when she made decisions. But 3 months of watching her lie to my face had changed something fundamental in my approach to problem solving. "You have 24 hours, I continued, standing up and walking past her to the front door. "Decide what you love more, your designer handbags or Arnold's cologne. But you can't have both and expect me to keep pretending I don't know the difference." I opened the door and gestured toward the boxes. "Your chariot awaits, princess." For the first time in our relationship, Sandra Mitchell was speechless. I should have known Sandra wouldn't go quietly. By noon, my phone was buzzing with calls from my supervisor at the engineering firm. By 12:30, I was sitting in Dave Morrison's office, looking at printed screenshots of text messages I'd supposedly sent to various women around town. "Jack, I've known you for 6 years, Dave said, adjusting his glasses as he studied the papers. This doesn't seem like you, but HR is asking questions. These messages are explicit. I examined the screenshots Sandra had provided. They were good forgeries. My phone number, timestamps that looked legitimate, even language that sounded like something I might write if I'd suffered a severe head injury and lost all sense of dignity. "Dave, can I borrow your phone for a minute?" He handed it over, and I dialed my own number. When my phone rang, I showed him the caller ID, then opened my text message history. "Here are my actual messages from the past week. Notice anything different?" Dave compared the real messages with Sandra's forgeries. The differences were subtle but clear. Wrong phone formatting, slightly off timestamps, and message threads that didn't exist in my actual history. "She's good," I admitted, "but she's not an engineer. She doesn't think about technical details the way we do." While Dave examined the evidence, I pulled out my backup phone, the old device I'd been using to document Sandra's activities for the past month. Every late-night call, every emergency client meeting, every time she'd claimed to be working when her office building was clearly empty. "Want to see what actual evidence looks like?" I asked, scrolling through recordings and location data. "Because I've got 3 months of it." Dave's expression shifted from concern to fascination. "Jack, what exactly is going on with your marriage?" "It's ending," I said simply. "The question is whether it ends quietly or whether Sandra wants to play games. Based on this morning's performance, I'd say she's chosen games." I forwarded copies of Sandra's real text messages to Dave's email, conversations with Arnold about their secret getaways, complaints about her boring husband, and detailed discussions about how much money she thought she could get in a divorce settlement. "I'll handle HR," Dave said, shaking his head. "But Jack, be careful. If she's willing to forge evidence, she might escalate." "Let her escalate," I replied, pocketing both phones. "I'm an engineer, Dave. I solve problems for a living, and Sandra just became a very interesting problem." I left the office and drove straight to Sandra's workplace, a sleek accounting firm in the upscale part of town. I'd been there exactly twice in 8 years. Once for a Christmas party, once to pick up Sandra when her car was in the shop. Both times, I'd felt out of place among the polished professionals in their expensive suits. Today, I felt perfectly comfortable. I walked into the reception area and asked to speak with Sandra's supervisor, Margaret Chen. While I waited, I noticed several of Sandra's colleagues whispering and glancing in my direction. Word travels fast in professional circles, especially when it involves scandal. Margaret appeared after 10 minutes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd always treated me with polite indifference during our brief previous encounters. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand there's been some confusion about your wife's work schedule recently." "No confusion at all," I said, handing her a manila envelope. "Sandra's been exactly where she said she'd be. The question is whether that's where you thought she was." Margaret opened the envelope and found printed copies of Sandra's location data, credit card receipts from restaurants and hotels, and time-stamped photos I'd taken of her car parked outside Arnold's apartment building during hours when she'd claimed to be working late at the office. "I'm not here to cause trouble for Sandra professionally," I continued, "but I thought you should know that when she calls in sick tomorrow, she'll probably be dealing with some personal issues rather than any actual illness." Margaret studied the documents with the same attention to detail that had made her a successful CPA. "Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. We'll handle this matter internally." As I left the building, I saw Sandra's car pulling into the parking lot. She'd obviously rushed over after hearing about my visit to her office. Through the windshield, I could see her talking frantically on her phone, probably to Arnold, possibly to her mother Isabella, definitely to someone she thought could help her regain control of the situation. I waved cheerfully as I drove past her, enjoying the look of panic that crossed her face when she realized her carefully constructed professional image was beginning to crack. The real fun was just getting started. Arnold Peterson lived in one of those modern apartment complexes that tried too hard to look sophisticated, all glass and steel angles, with a parking garage full of cars that cost more than I made in 2 years. His silver BMW sat in spot 47, gleaming under the fluorescent lights like a monument to midlife crisis spending. I'd done my research on Arnold over the past month. Divorced twice, worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove the BMW like it was a personality trait. Most importantly, he had the kind of ego that made him careless about details. I didn't touch his car. That would have been petty vandalism, and I was aiming for something more sophisticated. Instead, I left a small envelope under his windshield wiper with a simple message. "Your girlfriend's husband knows about the Harbor Inn. Room 237, last Tuesday, thought you should know." The beauty of the note was its ambiguity. I didn't threaten anything, didn't demand anything, didn't even specify which details I actually knew. I just planted a seed of uncertainty and let Arnold's guilty conscience do the rest. Then I drove to the Harbor Inn and had a friendly conversation with the desk clerk, a college kid named Tommy who recognized me as a regular customer from the restaurant attached to the hotel. "Hey, Mr. Mitchell, haven't seen you in a while. How's the harbor reconstruction project going?" "Moving along, Tommy. Listen, I'm trying to track down some receipts for my wife's business expenses. She had a client meeting here last Tuesday, room 237. You wouldn't happen to remember who she was with, would you?" Tommy checked his computer, then nodded. "Yeah, I remember that. Nice lady, your wife? She was with some guy in a fancy suit. They seemed friendly." "I bet they did," I said, slipping Tommy a $20 bill. "If anyone asks, we never had this conversation. But if you happen to remember any other details about their visit, I'd appreciate a call." I left my business card and drove home, where I found 3 voicemails from Sandra and 2 from her sister, Serena. The voicemails from Sandra progressed from angry to desperate to furious. The ones from Serena were more interesting. Apparently, Sandra had enlisted her sister as a character witness and information gatherer. Serena had always been the family gossip, the one who knew everyone's business and shared it freely at family gatherings. She was also married to a successful lawyer, which made her think she understood legal strategy better than she actually did. I called her back. "Jack, thank goodness," Serena said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Sandra told me you've been acting strange lately. She's worried about you." "I appreciate the concern, Serena, but I'm fine. Better than I've been in months, actually." "She says you've been following her, taking pictures, making accusations. That doesn't sound fine to me." I could hear the fishing expedition in her tone. Serena was trying to figure out exactly what I knew and how I'd found out. Unfortunately for her, I'd been listening to her pump family members for information for 8 years. I knew all her techniques. "Serena, did Sandra tell you she's been having an affair?" The silence stretched long enough for me to hear a dog barking in the background of her call. "Jack, that's a very serious accusation. Are you sure you're not just—" "I'm sure. The question is whether you want to be part of Sandra's cover story or whether you want to stay out of it entirely. Because I've got documentation, and I'm not particularly concerned about who gets embarrassed when it comes out." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm informing you. There's a difference. Sandra made her choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences. But you don't have to go down with her ship just because you're related." I hung up before Serena could respond, then spent the next hour organizing my evidence into neat digital folders. Photos, location data, credit card receipts, text message screenshots, everything organized by date and cross-referenced with Sandra's claimed alibis. My phone rang at 8 p.m. "Arnold, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "No, we don't, but if you want to talk anyway, I'll be at the shipyard tomorrow night at 9. Come alone and come prepared to have an adult conversation." The shipyard was exactly the kind of place Arnold would hate. A working-class bar near the docks, frequented by construction workers, fishermen, and engineers like me. It was loud, unpretentious, and full of people who would see right through Arnold's polished facade. Perfect for what I had in mind. The shipyard on a Thursday night was exactly what I'd hoped for. Crowded enough for witnesses, loud enough for privacy, and full of people who appreciated straightforward conversation over polished manipulation. I arrived early and claimed a table in the back corner where I could see both entrances. Arnold showed up at 9:15, dressed like he was attending a business dinner rather than meeting his girlfriend's husband in a dockside bar. His BMW looked absurdly out of place in the parking lot full of pickup trucks and motorcycles. He spotted me immediately and walked over with the kind of confidence that suggested he thought he could charm or intimidate his way out of whatever confrontation was coming. "Jack, right? Sandra's mentioned you." "I bet she has," I said, not standing up or offering to shake hands. "Sit down, Arnold. We have things to discuss." He sat across from me, glancing around the bar with obvious discomfort. The nearest table held 4 construction workers who were loudly debating the merits of different concrete mixtures. Not exactly Arnold's usual social circle. "Look, Jack, I think there might be some misunderstanding here." "No misunderstanding," I interrupted, pulling out a manila folder and placing it on the table between us. "Sandra's been lying to both of us, but she's been lying to you more creatively." I opened the folder and showed him printed bank statements, Sandra's personal account, which she'd apparently forgotten I had access to as a joint account holder. "See these charges? Harbor Inn, Romano's Restaurant, that boutique hotel downtown. Sandra told you she was paying for your dates with her own money, didn't she?" Arnold's confident expression wavered slightly. "What's your point?" "My point is that Sandra's been funding your relationship with money from our joint savings account. Every romantic dinner, every hotel room, every gift she's bought you, it's all been coming out of the account I've been contributing to for 8 years. I flipped to the next page, showing him credit card statements. But here's the interesting part. Sandra's also been telling me that her personal expenses have gone up because she's been taking clients out for business dinners. Same restaurants, same dates, same charges. But according to her, she was entertaining potential customers, not entertaining you. Arnold studied the papers, and I could see him doing the math in his head. You're saying she's been lying about the money? I'm saying Sandra's been running a very creative accounting scheme. She gets to play the generous girlfriend with you, the dedicated professional with me, and neither of us was supposed to compare notes. I pulled out my phone and showed him the location tracking data. But the real question, Arnold, is what else she's been lying about. Because according to this data, Sandra wasn't just seeing you on the nights she told me about. She was also meeting someone else on the nights she told you she was working late. That got his attention. Arnold's face went through several expressions as he processed the implications. You're lying. Am I? I scrolled through the location history, showing him timestamps and addresses. Tuesday the 15th, she told me she was with you, but according to her phone's GPS, she was actually at the Marriott downtown with someone else. Thursday the 22nd, same thing. Want me to keep going? Arnold's hands clenched into fists on the table. You're trying to manipulate me. I'm trying to inform you. Sandra's been playing both of us, but she's been playing you harder because you actually believed her performance. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. The question now is what you want to do about it. You can keep pretending Sandra's the victim in this situation, or you can admit that she's been using both of us for her own entertainment. Arnold stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Several people at nearby tables looked over with interest. This is ridiculous. Sandra loves me. She's leaving you to be with me. Really? I pulled out one more document, a printout of Sandra's text messages from the previous week. Because according to these messages she sent to her sister, she's not planning to leave me at all. She's planning to keep both relationships going indefinitely. I read directly from the printout. Why should I choose? Jack pays the bills, and Arnold makes me feel alive. I can have both if I'm careful. Arnold grabbed the paper from my hands, reading Sandra's actual words. The color drained from his face as he realized how completely he'd been manipulated. She said she was going to divorce you. She said a lot of things, Arnold. The question is, how many of them were actually true? Arnold crumpled the paper in his fist, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. That manipulative? Careful, I interrupted. We're in public, and there are witnesses. Wouldn't want to say something you'd regret later. But Arnold was past caring about witnesses. He threw the crumpled paper at me, his voice rising loud enough for half the bar to hear. You think you're so smart, don't you? Well, maybe Sandra was looking for someone who could actually satisfy her needs instead of some boring engineer who spends his time drawing pictures of bridges. The construction workers at the next table had stopped talking and were now openly watching our confrontation. I could see several other patrons turning to look as well. Perfect. Arnold, I said calmly, you're making a scene. Maybe you should sit down and lower your voice. Don't tell me what to do. You're pathetic. No wonder Sandra needed a real man to... That's when I stood up. Not quickly, not aggressively, just a smooth, deliberate movement that somehow made Arnold take a step backward. Arnold, you're embarrassing yourself. And more importantly, you're embarrassing Sandra. Is that really how you want to handle this? But Arnold was beyond rational thought. He took a swing at me. Clumsy, telegraphed, the kind of punch thrown by someone who'd never been in an actual fight. I sidestepped easily, and Arnold's momentum carried him forward into an empty chair. He stumbled, caught his balance, and spun around to face me again, his face red with humiliation and anger. The entire bar was watching now. Arnold, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, I think you should leave. You're drunk, you're upset, and you're about to do something that will make tomorrow's hangover even worse than it needs to be. Arnold looked around the bar, suddenly realizing that he'd become the center of attention in a room full of strangers who were clearly enjoying the show, his expensive suit, his carefully styled hair, his BMW in the parking lot. Everything that usually gave him confidence now made him look like exactly what he was, an outsider who'd lost control in front of people who had no reason to respect him. He straightened his tie, trying to recover some dignity. This isn't over. Yes, it is, I replied. Go home, Arnold. Call Sandra if you want. Compare notes. Figure out how much of what she told you was actually true, but leave me out of whatever comes next. Arnold walked toward the exit, his departure accompanied by murmurs and chuckles from the other patrons. Just before he reached the door, I called out one last comment. Arnold, don't forget to ask Sandra about the other guy, the one she's been seeing on Thursday nights. He paused at the door but didn't turn around, Then he was gone, leaving me alone with a bar full of witnesses who just watched Sandra's boyfriend make a complete fool of himself in public. I finished my drink, left a generous tip, and drove home to wait for Sandra's inevitable phone call. Sandra's call came at 11:47 p.m., and she was furious in a way I'd never heard before. Not the cold, controlled anger she usually deployed, but raw, desperate rage. "What did you do to Arnold? He called me screaming about lies and other men and public humiliation. What did you do?" I told him the truth, Sandra. All of it, including the parts you forgot to mention to both of us. You had no right. I had every right. You've been spending my money to fund your affair, lying to both of us about your schedule, and apparently seeing other people that even Arnold doesn't know about. I'd say I had plenty of rights. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear her breathing change from angry to something closer to panic. "Jack, we need to talk. In person. Tonight." "No, we don't. We needed to talk 3 months ago before you started this whole elaborate deception. Now we just need to finish it. Please, I can explain everything. It's not what you think. Sandra, I have GPS data, bank records, text messages, and witness statements. It's exactly what I think, and we both know it." I hung up and unplugged the phone from the wall. Whatever Sandra wanted to say, she could say it tomorrow when she came to collect the rest of her belongings. But Sandra had other plans. At 6 a.m., I woke up to find my driveway blocked by 3 cars. Sandra's sedan, Arnold's BMW, and a car I didn't recognize. Through my bedroom window, I could see Sandra pacing back and forth on my front lawn while Arnold sat in his car with the engine running. The third car held 2 people I couldn't identify from a distance. I made coffee, showered, and got dressed for work, taking my time with each task. Whatever confrontation Sandra had planned, she could wait until I was ready for it. When I finally opened the front door, Sandra rushed toward me with an expression that mixed desperation with calculation. "Jack, we need to settle this like adults. I've brought some people who can help us work through this situation." The third car disgorged 2 passengers, Isabella, Sandra's mother, and a man in an expensive suit who was obviously meant to be some kind of legal representation. "Mrs. Mitchell," Isabella said in her most imperious tone, "Sandra has explained the situation, and frankly, your behavior has been completely unacceptable. Stalking, harassment, public humiliation, these are serious matters." I looked at the lawyer, who was studying me with the kind of professional assessment that suggested he was already calculating billable hours. "And you are?" "Robert Kellerman, Family Law. I represent Sandra's interests in this matter." "Interesting. Sandra, did you tell Mr. Kellerman that you've been committing adultery for 3 months, using marital assets to fund your affairs, and lying to multiple parties about your whereabouts and activities?" Kellerman's expression shifted slightly. "Mr. Mitchell, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No need for privacy," I interrupted. "Everything I have to say, I can say in front of witnesses." I pulled out my phone and opened the folder containing Sandra's location data, bank records, and text message screenshots. "Mr. Kellerman, your client has been systematically defrauding our joint accounts to pay for hotel rooms, restaurant meals, and gifts for her boyfriend. She's also been lying to her employer about her whereabouts during business hours, potentially creating liability issues for her company." I showed him the bank statements, highlighting the charges that corresponded with Sandra's documented meetings with Arnold. Additionally, she's been conducting multiple simultaneous relationships while lying to all parties involved about the extent and nature of her commitments. Kellerman studied the documents, his professional demeanor becoming noticeably cooler towards Sandra. "Sandra, we need to discuss these allegations privately before we proceed." But Sandra was past the point of strategic thinking. "Those documents are private. You had no right to access my personal information." "Joint bank account, Sandra. Joint cell phone plan, joint credit cards. Everything I accessed was legally available to me as your spouse." Arnold finally got out of his car, apparently unable to stay out of the confrontation any longer. "Sandra, is what he said last night true? About the other guy? About the money?" Isabella looked confused. "What other guy? Sandra, what is he talking about?" And that's when Sandra's carefully constructed web of lies finally collapsed under its own weight. "There is no other guy. Jack is making things up to try to destroy my reputation." I pulled out the printed text messages and handed them to Isabella. "These are Sandra's actual words sent to her sister Serena last week. Read them yourself." Isabella read the messages, her expression growing colder with each line. When she finished, she looked at Sandra with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. "Sandra Elizabeth, what have you done?" "Mother, he's manipulating the evidence." "I can read, Sandra. These are your words, in your voice, describing exactly what this man says you've been doing." Arnold grabbed the papers from Isabella and read them himself. When he finished, he looked at Sandra with an expression of complete betrayal. "You said you loved me. You said you were going to leave him for me." "I do love you, Arnold. I was going to leave him. I just needed time to... To what? To find a third guy to string along while you kept lying to both of us." The confrontation was spiraling out of control, with Sandra trying to manage multiple angry people while her lawyer looked increasingly uncomfortable with his client's situation. That's when I played my final card. "Actually, Arnold, there is a third guy. Sandra's been meeting someone at the downtown Marriott every Thursday night for the past month. Someone who drives a red pickup truck and apparently thinks Sandra's name is Michelle." The silence that followed was complete. Sandra's face turned pale, and I knew I had struck right at the mark. "How could you possibly know that?" she whispered. "Because I followed you last Thursday, Sandra. I watched you meet him in the lobby, watched you go up to room 814 together, and watched you come back down 2 hours later. I also talked to the desk clerk, who confirmed that Michelle has been a regular customer." Arnold turned to stare at Sandra with an expression of complete revulsion. 3 guys? You've been juggling 3 guys at the same time?" Isabella dropped the papers and stepped away from her daughter like she was contagious. "Sandra, how could you do this to your marriage, to your family, to yourself?" Even Kellerman was shaking his head. "Sandra, I think we need to discuss a completely different legal strategy." But Sandra was beyond strategy now. She was cornered, exposed, and desperate. "Fine," she screamed. "Fine. Yes, I was seeing other people. Yes, I used our money. Yes, I lied to everyone. But you know what, Jack? I don't regret it. You're boring. You're predictable. You're everything I never wanted in a husband." She was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration and rage. "I settled for you because I thought you were safe. I thought you'd take care of me and never ask questions and never demand anything interesting or exciting or passionate. But I was wrong. I deserved better. I deserved more." The raw honesty of her outburst was more devastating than any of her lies had been. This was what Sandra actually thought of me, of our marriage, of the life we'd built together. Arnold looked sick. "Sandra, you told me you loved me." "I did love you. I loved how you made me feel. But that doesn't mean I wanted to give up everything else." Isabella was staring at her daughter like she was looking at a stranger. "Sandra, what happened to you? This isn't how I raised you. You raised me to believe I could have whatever I wanted if I was smart enough to get it. Well, I wanted excitement and security, passion and stability. Why should I have to choose?" Kellerman closed his briefcase. "Sandra, I can't represent you in this matter. The situation is too complicated, and frankly, your position is legally indefensible." As the lawyer walked back to his car, I felt a strange sense of completion. For 3 months, I'd been the only person who knew the full extent of Sandra's deception. Now everyone knew. Her mother, her boyfriend, her lawyer. They all understood exactly who Sandra really was. "Sandra," I said quietly, "you have until Sunday to get your remaining belongings out of the house. After that, I'm changing the locks." She looked at me with pure hatred. "You think you've won? You think destroying my life makes you the better person?" "I didn't destroy your life, Sandra. I just stopped pretending I didn't know what you were doing with it." Arnold got back in his BMW without another word and drove away. Isabella followed, shaking her head in disgust. Kellerman was already gone. Sandra stood alone in my driveway, surrounded by the wreckage of all her carefully maintained lies. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I'm not happy, Sandra, but I'm free, and that's enough." She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing in front of the house that was now completely mine. I went inside, made another cup of coffee, and spread my engineering blueprints across the kitchen table. I had a harbor to rebuild, and for the first time in months, I could focus on the work without wondering what lies I'd come home to. Outside, the storm clouds were finally breaking up, and I could see clear sky on the horizon.